"My father," said Beckwith, "was a well-to-do merchant who started a wholesale grocery business in Chicago, and like most men of business, wished his son to embrace his own calling, and had not a very high opinion of art. I had a good deal of trouble to induce him to give up his pet plans for my future. But at last I succeeded, and after taking lessons for some time in Chicago with Walter Sherlaw in 1871, I left Chicago for New York. On my arrival, I entered the Academy of Design and studied for 2 years under Professor Wilmarth. At the end of that time, that is to say, in 1873, I sailed for France, where I spent 5 years and met a host of interesting people. I joined Carolus Durand's class in the Boulevard Montparnassus, but I did not confine myself to this. From 4 to 6 each afternoon I studied drawing at the École des Beaux-Arts under Adolphe Vivant. Greatly as I admired Carolus Durand, I knew that he expected his pupils to be able to draw well before they came to him to learn how to paint. John Sargent, who was then in Carolus's studio too, entered the Yvon class about the same time. Boutet de Monvel, Renoux, and other clever men worked with us at Carolus Durand's. The class was particularly strong just then. Many of the men in it have since acquired celebrity. In my sketchbooks of those days, it was my good pleasure to record atelier comrades in Carolus's class, as momentary props to draw from, of which John Sargent was featured among the many sketches. He was very cooperative and a jolly good friend to have there, not to mention we were ready helpers for any project Monsieur Durand had for us to perform, that is to say, the murals of which we were his models, as well as contributing in his project. "I have a passion for Frans Hals," says Mr. Beckwith. "I brought the copy back from the town hall at Haarlem when I was last in Holland. Frans Hals and Velasquez are my favourite painters." Beckwith adds that he shares an enthusiasm for Velasquez, of course, with his old master Carolus Durand, in whose studio he spent some years. In 1877, Carolus Durand selected Beckwith and John Singer Sargent to help him with a mural for the Palais du Luxembourg. Following that, Beckwith returned to the United States in 1878 and was appointed a professorship at the Art Students League of New York, where he taught from 1878 to 1887. He would join William Merritt Chase to help establish a prominent art presence in New York for students, bringing fresh ideas and skills to a receptive America. As an artist, he concentrated on portraits, figure studies, and detailed renderings of historical monuments, but he never lost his interest in decorative design. Once settled in, he married Bertha Hall on June 1st, 1887, and his friend John Singer Sargent gave them a Venetian watercolour as a present. I had a very happy time of it in Paris. On the whole, you can get a great deal of pleasure out of life there cheaply, and in 1878 I exhibited my picture of the falconer at the Universal Exposition. Beckwith further expressed his views in an interview. "When I had learned all I could in Paris," continued the artist, "I came home. Chase, who had just left Munich, returned with me. This was, let me see, in 1879. On our return we both became teachers to the Art Students League. I took charge of the antique class. The young American movement associated with J. Alden Weir, St. Gaudens, Chase, and other bright men had just begun, and I threw myself into it with all my heart. I am a great believer in the future of American art, you know. I feel sure we shall have a worthy school some day, and I hold that it is better for ourselves and for the art we hope to found, that when we have studied abroad we should come back to our own country to work." "You do not think that Americans should learn their art at home, then, Mr. Beckwith?" "No, they must have foreign training too," said the painter. "I have now 75 pupils of my own whom I can help to a certain point, but they will be the better for some years abroad, I think. I repeat, though, they should not linger too long in Europe. Those of us who have returned have, I believe, produced stronger, better, and more personal work than men like, and for instance, who have settled down in Paris. We have profited from the lessons of the French masters, but we have gradually shaken off their too direct influence. We are more individual in our art, more original, and therefore, I suppose, more interesting." When artists think of the contrast between the homes of those millionaires and their own, few of the bohemians in the huge studio building would change with the Vanderbilts or Rockefellers around them, and Carroll Beckwith least of all would barter his art, with its hopes, joys, and hardships, for the lot of those Wall Street kings. For he knows that wealth is but the shadow, while art, to those who truly love it, is the substance of happiness. This is not a paradox. One afternoon I rapped at Mr. Beckwith's door, the first on the right as you leave the elevator. It was opened by a thin, pale man of middle height, with soft, bright eyes, and a well-shaped forehead. He wore a short brown coat, a kind of compromise between a vareuse, blouse in French, and a shirt, and in his hand he had his brush and palette. The elasticity and youth of his movements gave the lie to the masses of iron-grey hair which crowned his handsome face. His speech was low and pleasant to the ear, his manner was markedly easy, and the courtesy with which he bade me welcome to his rooms had something foreign in it like the tones of the voice, which suggested humour and good nature tinged with irony. "I have a model inside," said Carroll Beckwith as he showed me into a small anteroom preceding his studio. "But that doesn't matter. Glad to see you." And presently I found myself smoking a cigarette in the sanctum of one of the most promising and gifted of our younger painters. A very soothing place, this studio of Mr. Beckwith's, with its quiet but effective browns and greys, its unassuming refinement and good taste. Carroll returned to Paris in 1893 to paint a number of murals, and then returned to the United States to paint murals on one of the domes in the Liberal Arts Building at the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, later in 1893. He lived in Italy from 1910 to 1914, and painted many plein-air studies of monuments and landscapes. James Carroll Beckwith died of a heart attack in his apartment at the Hotel Schuyler on West 45th Street in New York City on October 24, 1917, at 65, after having taken a taxicab ride with his wife in Central Park. His papers, including his sketchbooks, and the diaries he kept from 1871 until his death in 1917, are held by the National Academy of Design in New York City.